Is calling someone hot at a poetry reading now an unforgivable sin? That's my subject on today's Flamingo File. I'm Janice Flamingo from the University of Ottawa. Poetry readings used to be spaces of erotic energy in which the poets on the stage, the purveyors of beautiful words, had power, and we in the audience wanted to bask in the glow. Now, that's all forbidden. An organization called VIDA, Women in Literary Arts, is inviting its members to take the Safer Lit pledge to make poetry readings as safe and staid as a meeting of the Committee to Prevent Public Vice. The pledge wants to outlaw what it calls, quote, non-consensual sexual advances. And it lists do's and don'ts for those who pledge, such as stepping in if you see something that doesn't look consensual. In other words, consent police. And although the website declares that, quote, these actions are not about punishing the perpetrator, they're about protecting current and future victims, end quote, we know there's punishment aplenty in store. Recently, the New York Times published an article called Cancelled Deals and Pulped Books as the Publishing Industry Confronts Sexual Harassment. The title should have read as the publishing industry caves in to sexual harassment hysteria in which deluded, vicious, or otherwise dangerous women use allegations of misconduct to destroy men's literary careers. The article tells of the many authors, some well-known, who have had their books deferred or their publishing contracts canceled because, quote, publishing companies are facing painful trade-offs as they cut ties with accused men in hopes of minimizing any collateral damage, end quote. Note that. Accused men, not men convicted of anything, and many of them accused of what we used to consider harmless flirting. Jamie Thomas, manager of a bookstore called Women and Children First in Chicago, has removed books by accused authors from her store shelves. She states, quote, I don't want to have our customers having to come in here and ask why we're supporting someone accused of sexual misconduct, end quote. She doesn't mind explaining, obviously, why she is removing a book that never did anybody any harm solely because of an unfounded accusation. In the 15th century in England, there used to be a practice called the bonfire of the vanities, in which a bonfire would be made of objects that were thought by religious authorities to cause sin. These were objects like mirrors, cosmetics, and of course, immoral books. They would be burned up in a public act of renunciation. Now we're, metaphorically of course, burning books, not because the books cause sin, in fact the subject of the books doesn't matter at all, but because they are the products of purportedly sinful men. 300-odd years after the bonfire of the vanities, the British poet Lord Byron, the bad boy of the early 19th century, caused outrage with his sexually irreverent poetry and rumors that he had had multiple love affairs, including with men, and it was said an incestuous relationship with his half-sister Augusta. His most famous poem, Don Juan, based on the legend of Don Juan, but with the main character an innocent seduced by women, was considered so shocking and immoral that various publishers refused to be associated with it. If the censors of early 19th century England had carried the day, we might have lost one of the greatest and most memorable long poems in the entire history of the English language. Today's censors claim to care about safety rather than morals, but they're every bit as punitive as those who hounded Byron out of England. Recently, the American poet Joseph Massie woke up one morning and found himself famous, to quote Byron, but of course not famous in a good way. A scurrilous website titled "The Poet Joseph Massie is an Abuser" was posted by anonymous accusers, and links to it were sent to Massie's publishers and his employer, the University of Pennsylvania. The website authors claimed that he was an abuser, that he used his depression and anxiety as excuses to prey on women, that he gaslighted his victims, and that he threatened to harm their reputations. What is actually posted on the website, though, is long on portentous declaration and very short on substance. Here's the main part of it. Quote, "The first time I met him, he was the star poet at a reading. He was extremely drunk and told me several times in front of a large crowd of published writers and my partner that he thought I was hot. I ignored it because every time he said it, he would then loudly cite depression and anxiety as reasons for acting out. It seemed that this was his public persona. Everyone's attitude was, it's just Joseph being Joseph. I became friends with him. Years later, though I should have known better, someone had even warned me about him and his grooming behavior. He ended up having an outburst at me in a manner that was extremely inappropriate and that mirrored many of the stories I have since heard. I have reason to believe it was because he felt entitled to be romantic and or sexual with me, even though I never remotely showed interest," end quote. Well, even within this presumably carefully crafted text, which is obviously designed to inflict maximum damage on Joseph Massie, the self-contradictions and special pleading are hard to ignore. If Joseph Massie's behavior at the poetry reading was really so off-putting, if it was so disturbing to be called hot, why would the author go on to become friends with him later? And how can we square the statement that most of those around Massie found his behavior entirely excusable, it's just Joseph being Joseph, if in fact someone was also warning about his grooming behavior? I mean, which was it? And what exactly was so inappropriate about his so-called outburst? The whole post goes on like this. It's vague, full of sound and fury, signifying only that Joseph Massie is, like most people, capable of saying mean things occasionally. Massie has publicly admitted that years ago, when he was in his 20s and early 30s, he had a drinking problem and was at times verbally abusive on social media. He once grabbed a friend's breast at a poetry event when he was drunk, and he quarreled with a girlfriend while he was drunk. But this was all a decade ago. Since then, he's changed his life, joined AA, and apologized to the people he hurt. Are the missteps from his past really bad enough that he should be drummed out of the creative writing community and have his career and reputation ruined? It seems the answer is yes. Ruin has befallen Joseph Massie. His accusers have, as I said, inundated the offices of his publishers and his employer with their claims. They contacted various newspapers and have had at least one story published based on their accusations. The head of the writing program at the University of Pennsylvania, where Massie worked in the past and where he was supposed to work this summer, he wrote him a letter canceling the contract, saying he had received what he called, quote, credible statements about your inappropriate behavior, end quote. Wesleyan University Press has deferred publication of an upcoming book of poetry of Massie's, and other presses say they will no longer publish his work. There has been a pile-on of slander and character assassination on social media. Massie has experienced a mobbing of classic proportions, all in the name of making the literary world safe for women. I suspect that these women and their male allies who pour so much time and energy into ruining their male rivals and working to stamp out any whiff of male sexuality from literary events are as short on talent as they are long on nastiness. They can't help that, I suppose, but it's shocking that they're being given the power to ruin literature for us all.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please support us on Patreon. If even half of our subscribers gave us $1 per month, we'd be well on our way to creating more and better content. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Studio Brule.